Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Hello.
Hello.
Well, we're here to talk about the medieval middle class in fashion.
Welcome, everyone.
Welcome. All right. So, I guess the first thing that we want to talk about is defining the medieval middle class.
Yeah.
Because that's one of those things that is really hard to define even in today's society.
Yeah.
If we think about the medieval middle class, one of the biggest issues really is defining it as an economic position. If anything, I think for me anyway, I tend to define the middle class in the medieval period as a social definition. When we think about the middle class, we need to think of it as less of what jobs people are doing, and more so as a position that is created, or a social class that's created between the bonded serfs or the landed peasantry and the aristocratic class, and obviously also the clergy. So this class that arises out of the cities and the free cities, and they arise to. So, some people think they're like a service industry or they're merchants, but they're not. These are free people, so they're removed from feudalism, and they have a whole range of socio-economic conditions.
So this is not one of the three estates that we famously associate with feudalism.
That's exactly right. So they form a middle class, a class that is in the middle of the aristocracy and the peasantry. And that's why we call them the middle class. Now, obviously, today we have the middle class, which has a whole lot of different political hang-ups. So we think of the middle class as either blue-collar workers or white-collar workers of different wealth different types of wealth. Working professionals, and it depends on which side of the political spectrum you're sitting on. But I don't like to think of them that way. I think of the middle class as being definitely a social construct that's arising from the workers and the merchants that create a position or a state for themselves, removed from definitely from feudalism. They're free, and what we mean by free is that they're not in any way bonded to feudal lord. And I'm going to have a huge caveat here, is that the free cities are definitely engaged in some type of feudal obligations, but that's the whole entire city, not individuals.
So can you give examples of what kinds of people would have been making up the middle class in the Middle Ages or the late Middle Ages?
That would be any citizen of the city. That ranges from a labourer all the way to a wealthy petty nobility or merchant or patrician elite. So everyone in between.
So does this include people like crust people?
Absolutely.
Does this include farmers?
Not so much, because the rural farmers, obviously they're rural, and they're not citizens of the city.
Yeah. So we're talking about the fashion of the people of the city today.
Fashion of the people of the city, medieval, urban, middle class.
Yep.
Yeah.
Right. So the fashion of the people of the city. So this middle class, these people arose when? Was it after the Black Death?
No.
Okay.
No, the medieval middle class really starts forming around. We see the city start forming around about the 11th century, but we really see this boom in these cities starting around about the 12th century.
Okay.
It's like peak city, 12th to 13th century. 14th century is really the height of the medieval city, going onwards.
Because this is when we see the fashions of the middle class start to this is when we see a real change in fashion in like the 14th century and that's what we're talking about today, is the fashion of the people of the city.
Yes.
And of the middle class, not the nobility.
That's right.
So, how can we sort of bring this all together?
I think it's really important to acknowledge the Black Death and its role in fashion. Like, at least when we talk about fashion in medieval Europe, is that there seems to be this huge change in all of the artistic and visual representation of the body and the physical displays of wealth post Black Death.
Yeah. Okay.
Prior to the Black Death in the 14th century, there's this shift, and I would really start leaning towards that post the Great Famine. But Black Death really sees this huge change in the way people are displaying their physical wealth, and a lot of that has to do with the way people start changing the way they think of themselves, but also the interchange in wealth from the landed elites to everyone else. So there's a huge exchange of wealth from the people who have all the wealth to everyone else. So that's a huge important change as well. So people start wearing more wealth because they have more wealth, so they want to display their wealth. And we also have to look at the trendsetters, because what is fashion if not, I guess, display of social capital? So, I mean, today we see those who have social capital, that could be the youth. So youth are huge displayers and creators of social capital.
Or celebrities.
I mean, in the 80s, it was the mega wealthy. And then the 60s, it was the youth. 90s, it was the youth. So
we're talking about the 1960s to 90s.
Yeah, 1960s.
Not the 1360s to 90s, but for
example. But in for example, the 1360s, the trendsetters, for example, were the aristocracy. They were the elite. So post Black Death, we see a huge change in the way that fashion and the displays of wealth were definitely prescribed.
Did you see the middle class looking up and sort of performing that emulation to have that sort of not proximity to power, but that having an association with the trappings of wealth, thereby elevating themselves, trying to increase their social capital through the display of wealth, through their garments? Or
definitely,
right.
I mean, they have more money. They inherit more money, or just acquire more wealth through just coming into it. There's lots of different sources that talk about people just getting more things after the Black Death, and just spending it on clothing that they would never have owned before. So people are just wearing silks and furs and pearls and gold, and it just having this huge impact on society.
And this upsets the nobility, doesn't it?
Oh, it upsets Absolutely.
Because this disrupts the understanding of everyone about who's who.
Absolutely, because
no one knows
prior to this interchange of like between society and the level, and the ranking of society, you could tell who people were. You could say, well, this person was of this social rank because they just dressed a certain way. And if you were of the aristocracy, your cut of your cloth, the cut of your cloth was a certain way, and you wore clothing of a certain wealth. But now the urban elite, or just the people from the city, were dressing of a certain standard. And you couldn't just eyeball someone and go, oh, well, were you nobility? Were you aristocracy? Were you a knight? No one could tell by just looking at you. So this really upset the social order because the language of fashion is coded. So if I dress, say for example, if I go out and I buy Armani and Gucci and all these other brands, and I rent a Ferrari and I drive around, I will just be assumed. I get like a $500 haircut as opposed to doing it at home. I'll just be assumed that I'm wealthy and I'll be let in to all the social clubs.
You'll be treated in a different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. However, if I go out and I buy everything from a cheap bulk store, just whatever, and I try to enter those same clubs, I won't be allowed in. Doesn't matter how much money that's in my pocket. So that's those standards still apply today. Yeah.
So then of course, we see regulations like sumptuary laws as an attempt to try and prevent the middle class from emulating those styles of dress, yeah?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and those were regional, weren't they?
Well, not only are they regional, they're also depend on your station.
So this is really interesting. So sumptuary laws weren't just like across the board, so-and-so can't wear gold, so-and-so can't wear this kind of fur, etc. So we can't use this as reenactors to just guide our choices of fabrication and whatnot for our...
Yeah.
So we need to be quite careful using sumptuary laws.
That's right.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
Well, yeah. So sumptuary laws are regional. They're also, you start seeing sumptuary laws appearing in the 14th century. They are trying to regulate how people are dressing. And yes, there are sumptuary laws also before the 14th century.
Yeah.
Because sumptuary laws are just laws of regulating dress. So before someone comes at me, like there are sumptuary laws in the world today. Like every culture has sumptuary laws, right? But when we're talking about like these sumptuary laws, many sumptuary laws were put in place and they were repealed because they were not fit to purpose. Sumptuary laws, if we're talking about many sumptuary laws that were put in place in the 14th century, they were trying to regulate for a specific purpose. A lot of sumptuary laws that were put in place often were the church putting them in to stop what they saw as immoral dress, because everyone was dressing just immorally, short, too short tunics, too richer clothes. Often sumptuary laws were put in place because, as we were saying, that the middle class was dressing above their station. Or the other way we see sumptuary laws and need to be interpreted is that the middle class and these urban centres were upset that the aristocracy was coming in and dressing too fancily.
So like the rural aristocracy?
Yeah,
Or the local aristocracy?
Well, the rural aristocracy.
Yeah, right.
They were coming in and dressing too fancy.
Yeah.
And they were saying, well, we don't do this here. This is too ostentatious for us. And they were trying to regulate that, saying, well, if you're going to come into our city, we don't wear lots of pearls and we don't wear brocades here. We're a little more modest in the way we dress. Mm-hmm. So understanding the third part or the next part of sumptuary laws is that we need to look at those and go, well, this is a great way to understand how people were dressing.
It's not necessarily a hard and fast guide of what your impression would or would not be. Yeah. It's like just because there's a sumptuary law saying that a person of your station should not wear this doesn't mean that a person of your station didn't wear it.
Yeah. It's more about it's a good idea of understanding what people were wearing because they were trying to regulate those things. Yeah. It's like saying that if you read road codes, for example, and it says you should not spin your tires at this speed to create loud noise and smoke, well, then you definitely know that people are spinning their tires to create loud noise and smoke.
In certain contexts.
Yeah. It's not to say everyone's doing it, right? Yeah.
Context again.
Yeah, context.
Yeah. We love context. So what was our next point? So we were next going to talk about how are we going for time?
Oh, plenty of time.
Yeah, okay. So clothing in the urban spaces. What did you want to talk about there? Did you want to move straight to the next topic, like the next subtopic in this? So
we're just gonna kind of just go through a couple points.
Yeah. We're gonna go for about total of 45 minutes today, just so for the people who are tuning in.
Yeah. So we're gonna just pop onto the next point here. We're going to talk about like how clothing manufacturer really. Clothing manufacturer. How did they obtain their clothing? So some of the things that we're looking at is, I think I'll lean on to you on this one.
Hold on a second, I'm a bit lost.
We're there.
Oh yeah, okay. All right. Oh yeah. So like
professional, everyone.
Yeah, I was a professional clothing manufacturer in the medieval period. That's how old I am. No, I there are sources that do suggest that there was off-the-rack clothing manufacture in the medieval period, and perhaps even what can be perhaps considered fast fashion, or an early precursor of fast fashion in the medieval period. So there was a fairly fast turnover of fashion trends, especially ramping up in the late 14th century. And there was certainly the ability of clothing producers to supply that demand for the latest fashion. And, you know, this depended on your level of wealth, whether you were able to afford this kind of thing. We have one account of... can you refresh my memory? The King of France?
The King of France,
At what date, approximately?
The middle of the 14th century.
Middle 14th century, who bought... it worked out to something like a pair of shoes every 2 days.
Yeah.
And he bought those from one supplier.
Yeah, one supplier.
So there's shoemaker to the king, I suppose, and that was not an in-house shoemaker. That was an independent shoemaker, but they were appointed to the French king. So, I guess the king just, would get sick of their shoes, or they were buying shoes for everyone in their employ.
In this account, it says shoes for the king, and also there was shoes for the queen. But she didn't have as many shoes.
Yeah,
she had fewer shoes than the king.
That's right. In this period, masculine people were the drivers of fashion.
Yeah.
In general, they were more fashion forward than than women and femmes. So that is an aside, but a little bit of interesting trivia. So it's my thought. So that's one example, but it's my thought that so that's an example of someone having their clothing made and turning over clothing pretty quickly. But it's my thought that there were workshops that were making clothing on the rack, so they were selling it off the rack. They would produce clothing sort of just not necessarily standardized sizes, but perhaps they were making clothing that they could simply sell to people of sizes that would fit most people, and then otherwise people could come and commission a piece that was more tailored, or perhaps they would have part finished garments in popular colours, and then people could come and have those sort of more tailored to their own personal fit measurements. Otherwise, there was the option of, so if you were very wealthy, such as, for example, I'm just trying to think of a specific example. So, say the Merchant of Prato, who was the richest merchant in Florence.
Yeah.
Yes. So he had garments custom made for his family. The tailor would specifically make garments for them to their specifications, and that could and making garments for those people and people like them could take some time. Like that the tailors could come in and spend some time with the family, or they could send out to the tailors, and they would spend some time on those garments and make them specially for those people. So you had, I think, from the reading that I've done, is you had the whole range of, your basic ready to wear all the way through to a specially tailored high quality garment in the late Middle Ages. And this is within the middle class.
There seems to be some evidence that there's different guilds handling different kinds of garmentry as well. So there's hosiers.
Yeah.
Their job is purely to make hose.
Yeah.
Then you've got other hatters, obviously making hats. You've got other guilds that are making just gowns and the fur guild their job is purely to attach fur linings on things. They can't sew anything else. So
you have the quilts. What are they called? The
juponiers.
Juponiers, thank you. Yeah. So they just do jupon. Quilted garments.
And the drapers can only do drapes, obviously. So each guild does a separate thing. More importantly, an assertion that has been made by our current source of reading on cotton, Maureen
Fennell
Mazoui. She asserts that there was a whole entire industry of off-the-rack underwear in cotton. So there you go. So what we're looking at there is off-the-rack clothing and shoes. This is something else that seems to be the case, that and belts as well. All kinds of different garments easily and readily available, as well as more importantly a raging second-hand clothing market.
Yes. This is really interesting.
So on top of that, garments are not only donated or sold to pawnbrokers. So that's all spectrums of society. The ultra wealthy are donating and pawnbroking garments as well that are ending up in this massive second-hand market, which obviously then the middle class, and when we're talking about middle class again, we really need to not think about the middle class as being wealthy burghers, but all of that society that aren't that wealthy aristocratic elite, all the way down to the peasantry. And this is how they're accessing those fashions. So
what would have happened to the king's pair of shoes every 2 days?
Well, most likely they would have been donated to the household.
Oh, okay.
The king's household.
All right.
But we have accounts of like duchesses, like empearled, encrusted headdresses being sold to pawnbrokers.
Gosh.
Like, where do they go? Like, most likely that would probably have been split up for its like parts and sold to, crafters and things like that. But,
we do hear of things being bequeathed in wills. But
oh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously then as well, you've got the wills being bequeathed, fine garments of the latest style to the impoverished, which is, or the destitute, which is different to the impoverished. But, but the secondhand clothing market is raging during that period.
I've also read, I think it was in The Merchant of Prato, about, there's sort of your high quality fashions and then your sort of cheap and cheerful fashions in
Absolutely.
the style of the higher quality fashions.
Yeah.
Like, there's an account of I'm having a very nice belt. I think it's what's Dattini's wife's name?
Margareta.
Margareta I'm having a very nice belt made for myself of the highest quality, and then their friend or their cousin or whatever is getting married, and I'm having, it's like a poor relation, or I'm having a very nice belt made for her. It's very fashionable, but it's of the metal and etc. of the lower quality.
Yeah.
But it will serve very well.
Yeah. I'll have a pewter one made for her.
Yeah, something like that.
I'll have like a silver one made for me.
Yeah, something of that nature. Yeah. So.
And I mean that's a really good point. That in that period as well, like people just had things made for friends and families.
Yeah, true.
Like that was like a thing that happened as well. I think we'll.
How are we going for time? Yeah, we've just got another 10 minutes.
We'll keep moving.
So we were going to talk about. Did you want to talk about workers' clothes, or did you want to move on to manuscripts?
I think we'll talk about workers' clothes.
Yeah. This is not something I'm.
So I think with workers' clothes, because workers take part in that whole entire urban space as well, there are very few depictions of what workers wear. There are a lot of reasons for this. Some of the reasons is like who are the manuscripts or the art being made for. As you start entering into the 15th century and 16th century, those commissioning the art are workers themselves. In the 14th century and earlier, the art is being created for those who are the aristocratic elite, and they have a kind of they want to see themselves depicted essentially. What workers' clothes we see tend to be not very clearly depicted. They tend to be depicted wearing the everyday clothing. Lots of aprons and different styles of aprons, however, do start appearing. There are some textual references of one-piece suits like overalls. But I don't want to lean too heavily on that because I don't know too much about it. And it's one of those weird garments that are spoken of, but we don't know what they look like, and we know nothing about them. And you think, well, what is this thing? So so don't really know too much about it. And is this actually a thing? So there are a lot of medieval garments that aren't really we know nothing about, but they talk about. They talk about, and you go, well, we don't know what they are. We don't know what they look like.
Don't have any extant examples.
Don't have any extant examples. Yeah. Like the corset.
Yeah, what's a corset?
What's a corset? On that corset investigation.
Yeah. There's no corsets in the Middle Ages.
So yeah, but definitely consider if you want to do a medieval middle class worker. There are lots of different kinds of aprons. There seems to be things like people who are masons or those types of, or carpenters have a it's like a big triangle apron. It starts up here, point, and it comes down the front. There are aprons that start at the waist as well, and it's more of a rectangle, and you tend to see that for occupations like bakers. Obviously anything you don't need to cover your chest.
You see a bit of a change in style too through time. So I've noticed a change in feminine apron styles. Early to mid, even late 14th century, sort of a pleated style on the waist, and then in the 15th century they seem to be doing like a gathered style on a drawstring that kind of is suspended from the neck. So it's interesting to look at these different styles and how they change through them. Yeah.
But that said, I saw a image recently of a pewterer melting pewter, and they are dressed with no shirt whatsoever, like completely naked chest.
Oh yeah.
Because it's really hot, right?
Yeah.
They've got their underwear on, they've got their hose rolled down, no gloves, and just their only safety equipment is they've got a super long handle, and they're pouring pewter. Safety.
Yeah.
I mean, but you see that same thing in...
No gloves or anything?
I mean, no gloves, yeah. But, I mean, you see the same thing in a lot of factories in rural areas, in what we would class as the third world, and we go to those, but that's just that's what you do. You have a really long stick with a cup at the end, to stay away from the hot. So there you go.
So where are we up to now? So thinking about images, manuscript images and stuff.
Let's go to misconceptions.
Yeah.
Let's pop to misconceptions.
You wanna go straight there? Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Yeah, misconceptions about the fashions of the medieval middle class.
Yeah.
What are some common misconceptions in your opinion?
Oh, well, I think the first thing is that when it comes to manufacturing, I mean, some of the very big ones is that the middle class or anyone but the mega wealthy or the aristocratic elite didn't wear anything but the most dulled and muted colours.
Yeah.
Which to me is mind-boggling because there is the guild. Okay. All right. So back to the topic at hand.
So we dropped out just as we were beginning the section on misconceptions. So we were talking about, I believe, colours, the quality of colours and whether the middle class were just wearing duller colours or less saturated colours. and you were talking about there being a comprehensive dyeing industry throughout Europe at the time.
Absolutely. Highly skilled, highly industrialized. They were dyeing all ranges of fabrics. And we know that they were dyeing, as I was saying, cotton, wool, silk, linen, and blends of all kinds.
Yeah.
And we know this because they wrote down their recipes, and they also were highly regulated. They highly regulated their industry.
This was by the guilds, wasn't it?
Well, it was, yeah. So all fashion production was regulated by the guilds. So the guild regulations determined how fashion was shaped as well. So fashion construction, much as it is today, is regulated by the industry of which creates it.
Quality control now.
So where there's assertions made that only X class wore this color, or, you know, if you're poor, you could not wear this. Well, that's that assertion doesn't really apply. What really more applies is
complex, isn't it?
Yeah, is what textiles were people wearing. So, say, for example, in the mid to late 14th century is the availability of what fabrics is determining what colours people are wearing because of their ability to be dyed well. So in southern to mid Europe, the cheap cotton was dropped, and the cheaper production of the German linen was picked up because it was a cheaper fabric to manufacture than the Italian cotton. So that's something that needs to be considered, as opposed to what was traditionally worn in the earlier period was Italian cotton as the cheaper fabric. You know, and we need to then consider what fabrics was worn by the middle class or the poorer middle class. You know, because of the you know, so but that's not to say that people still weren't wearing cotton, because there's definitely regulations against making black cotton hose in emulation of the high quality black woolen hose, which was very popular. But to make high quality black cotton hose required a process which damaged the cotton fiber because you had to use a really alkaline solution. So the cotton hose would only last a year or two, but they still did it because there was high demand for the fabric.
Gee, that sounds like fast fashion.
So these are things that we really need to consider.
So that's kind of a misconception about like the poor only wore like pale colours, drab colours, and the rich only wore were the only ones that had the access to the more vivid colours. So what are the misconceptions about the quality and finish of clothes? Do you think that it was like something that was kind of variable, or was it fairly consistent, or what are your thoughts about like misconceptions about quality and finish in the medieval period? because I have opinions.
Well, I know you. Why didn't you say what you want to say?
I think that it was there was actually a lot of consistency. I've obviously spent a lot of time looking at the late 14th century, so that's my thing. But in that period, it was I've looked at different archaeological finds, and there is a surprising amount of consistency between archaeological finds in Eastern Europe, Italy, and then London. They're incredibly similar in the similar time period, and I don't know if this is an indication of consumer expectations,
Standardization of the guilds,
standardization of the guilds, or but I would think standardization of the guilds. Although guild regulations did vary from city to city, did they not? Yeah.
They
so,
did.
but
the guild standardization
fashion trends
and fashion trends,
Yeah.
while guild standardization did travel. So once
Yeah.
one guild, and it wasn't the case that one guild would say, "All right, hey, I've decided this. Let's take it
Yeah.
and make everyone do it."
Yeah.
But once one guild made a decision and it worked, every other guild regionally or internationally would go, "Hey, this is a really good idea. Let's all do it."
Yeah.
So standardization was a thing. Weights and measures, sizes, loom widths, production processes. That was a thing.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we just dropped out maybe there for a sec. But yeah. I was just going to say maybe not internationally, but
Oh no, absolutely internationally. Without a doubt.
Australia?
Well, when we're talking internationally, we're talking about countries within Europe.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's more like it. So were people where were these clothes being manufactured? Do you think people were mainly making their clothes at home, or where?
In the urban centres, they're not making them at home.
Yeah, and I think this is maybe a bit of a misconception that people were, women are spinning and weaving at home and sewing all their clothes at home for the family in the urban centres. I think maybe this could have happened a fair bit in rural areas, but in the urban centres, no, not so much. This is not cottagecore. It's people are buying their clothes, and the clothes are regulated by the guilds on the whole.
Yeah.
However, there's a caveat. They were today. There were professional spinners, weavers, and sewers of various types, and they would take their work home like we have today. They would they were home sewers. That's the term that I have heard used in the contemporary clothing production industry. Take their work home, make the pieces of work at home, and then that was their job. That's their job. They're not, producing their own little bits of clothing for themselves at home. So they're literally doing it as a business or as a job. So they might be have an independent business where they're buying their stock and then making at home, and then they're selling it on, or they might be taking piecework from someone else and then passing it back in there. That's part of the putting out system. That's the putting out system which we hear about, and that's actually in some ways quite similar to today, where companies farm out work to home sewers. Yeah.
So a large portion of until the guilds start centralising production into factory houses, large portion of weaving happened in the home.
Yeah.
And that would be both men and women.
Yeah.
Yeah. However, there are a lot of women who, to make extra money, would weave or sew at home, and that would entail they would either buy the raw goods themselves as weavers, or be provided with those goods, weave or sew, and then, as you said, on sell, or provide those goods back. But there is little to no evidence, at least in the urban areas, of people being home tailors, making their own clothes. And, in the rural areas, different story altogether. But if we're thinking about the urban centres, people are working for a living during the day, much like we do today. Like, we all we all got a job. We go to work. At night,
make a wage.
At night, you have curfew, which means to put out lights, to put out fires. People don't have money to have candlelight generally. It's also
unless you're rich, but even then, curfew.
It's curfew.
Yeah.
Fires and lights are to be put out because there's a high fire risk. And people can have candlelight, but it's very expensive. Like, candles are very expensive. Usually, the churches can hardly afford to light the church as well.
Also, there are guild regulations about working by candlelight. Yeah.
Yes, it is illegal to work at night because it gives you an unfair advantage.
Perhaps this indicates that people were doing it.
Well, that's right. Yeah.
The fact that they had to regulate.
Yeah, because it is an unfair advantage to work at night because it's about a fair system of competition. So people wouldn't stay up and sew their own clothes at night because it's too expensive. You just earning enough money to live is your largest concern. Most people are sleeping as soon as it gets dark. They're going to sleep. Madness.
Imagine getting that much sleep.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you wanted to talk about in terms of misconceptions? Because we might wrap this up soon, if not.
I think we might talk about what this means for reenacting.
Yeah, cool. Great. Well, hang on a second. We did talk. Hold on. Let me just get my eyeballs on this. I would say, on the whole, it's important to assess your sources really carefully. So even if they are primary sources from the period, manuscript images, even extant garments, assess them really carefully. Think about the context. These are fabulous sources, but they need to be considered in terms of where they come from, who would have been using them in terms of manuscript images. These are allegorical. Care to expand on this?
Yes.
You are far more eloquent.
Well, just in regards to allegory or religious depictions, is that often that what we may be looking at could be depicting someone who is intended to be a mythical figure, or someone who is intended to be a foreigner, or someone who's intended to be a figure from the far past, or often when you're looking at biblical scenes, someone may be a Pharisees, or someone may be one of the enemies of the Israelites, and so they're dressed in a fashion that is contemporaneous, but also a little weird, like three-pointed hats, for example. And you look at it and go, wow, it's a three-pointed hat. That's cool, but that's also meant to demonstrate that they're from far away or distant or weird. They're an outsider.
Very choppy.
Yeah. So that's just an indication of this is not normal.
Yeah. I was going to say in terms of extant garments, a fantastic example of extant garments that need to be carefully considered are a lot of the surviving garments that have come down to us have been conserved because they are either funerary garments or they are the garments of royalty, so they're precious garments. So they've been conserved because of their. So with funerary garments, they have been conserved obviously because they've been, locked in a coffin or, with the person's body. Funerary garments are not necessarily representative of typical fashion because they may have been hurriedly put together. They may be very formal. They may be ceremonial. They may have, there may be a number of things that may be influencing the structure, fabrication, appearance of these garments. The thing with the obviously the garments of nobility, they're extremely high class garments, and that's fabulous, but it doesn't necessarily help with representing all facets of the middle class. And it's great for your moneyed elites of the middle class. For example, perhaps the Charles de Blois pourpoint could be helpful. The other one was the Greenland garments. They are fantastic, I think, in terms of their tailoring. However, they come from a farm and somewhat, although there was a lot of trade with Greenland, they are
lots of trade.
There is somewhat isolated community, and that it's a farming community. They were using largely the local materials, although there was some dye stuff. So I believe that came from overseas, or may have come from overseas, and they, as such, need to be considered with that in mind. So, just when you're looking at these sources, even though these are literally extant garments, they need to be considered with these things in mind. The context. Where that was probably it for that. Anything else? You were going to talk about what does it mean in terms of princely garments. So let's remember that although there were definitely affluent people in the middle class,
extremely affluent, extremely affluent people.
Much of the population of Europe, because we're talking about European medieval people today, much of the population of Europe was impoverished or living subsistence. They were under subsistence living, which is, hand to mouth.
Yeah. So don't
and we can relate to that today. A lot of people today live subsistence. Even people who have enough to eat, have a roof over their head.
Yeah.
So have a job.
So even the wealthy merchants, quote unquote wealthy merchants, often were not super rich. Poverty, 75% of Europe was impoverished. And when we talk about impoverished, we don't necessarily mean super wealthy. So when someone says I'm a merchant,
you were saying?
Yeah, so what I was saying is that while there, a huge portion of Europe was impoverished, when we think about impoverishment, we need to think about that they're often wealthy in land, they own property, but they don't have financial wealth. They don't have lots of money. So often people depicting the middle class, they are not necessarily depicting it correctly because they're depicting the aristocracy as merchants. Yes, they were very wealthy merchants, but a large number of merchants weren't wealthy. They were, what we would think of a small business person today, someone who's just getting by. The aristocracy also was highly at risk of becoming impoverished. And so this is something that we need to think about when we consider the wealth of the middle class. I mean, when we think of Chaucer and he speaks of the guildmen, he speaks of them having their knives bedecked in gold as of any good burgher. So again, he talks about how wealthy in that period the craftspeople were. So again, we can't really tie that down because, as we can see in that period, the craftspeople are becoming more and more wealthy and they're displaying their wealth. So think again that if you're displaying someone of the middle class or the craftsman, that you're not just putting the drabbiest and most poorest of clothing on, that the middle class and the craftspeople had enough wealth, that they were displaying wealth. So it's this really tight balance. They had wealth. They were capable of purchasing quite a large amount of items and clothing and engaging in fashionable displays. But at the same time, I often try not to bedeck myself in jewels and gold and pearls and furs when I'm displaying someone of as a merchant, because unless I'm displaying a very wealthy merchant, because they did exist.
Good job. So, shall we? Do you want to take any questions, or shall we just wrap up? We've got a couple of people, I think.
I think we'll wrap up.
Yeah, we're having a lot of problems.
Having a lot of tech difficulties. Yeah, so we're just going to wrap up.
Yeah.
But
so thank you everyone who stuck around and everyone who stayed with us just at the start. I hope you've enjoyed the talk today. We'll try and iron out these tech problems for the next one. We've really done a bit well. Andrew's done his best to sort those out. If you would like to do a bit more reading about any of the some of the topics that we've discussed today, we've just popped a few sources down below for a bit of interest. I hope you might go and check those out for your own enjoyment and information.
And the full talk or the full stream will be re-uploaded very soon. And it won't have all these terrible breaks in it.
Okay. Well, thanks for watching, and remember to stay safe,
have fun,
and keep reenacting.